There are few anime characters who, after being at the top and falling spectacularly, return to Olympus like the damn legends they always were. Although it appears another YouTube channel has taken over my content. The reality is that McLaren is a team that, for a good part of its history, has always been associated with success, dominance, and championships. However, since 2013 it suffered an unsuccessful and uncompetitive streak, practically unprecedented. Going from being a top team used to winning to being one of the worst on the grid. However, when you hit rock bottom, only two things can happen to you. Either you return to the top, or you stay there and disappear, or you remain in eternal mediocrity, as has happened to many other examples throughout history. But what McLaren did was not just come back, but do it in a big way and with absolute brute force. And now they have managed to become Constructors' Champions again, but also in this one. In 2025, they are the dominant force of the Grand Circus, heading towards their second consecutive Constructors' Championship and the first driver's title since 2008, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to tell you how this team rose from its ashes, how it became once again a team worthy of its enormous legacy, and why McLaren's future could be very promising. Telling you the story of how they hit rock bottom, but how did they get back up after that? So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this video about how the McLaren Formula 1 team made its comeback. To understand this story, it's essential to know the historical context of the second most successful Formula 1 team. Only behind Scuderia Ferrari, McLaren F1 team is a team created by the New Zealander Bruce McLaren in 1966. An enthusiast of speed who, after a bad relationship with the Cooper team, wanted to form his own structure to compete in the top tier of motorsport. It was born in 1966, and by 1968, they already knew what it was like to win a Formula 1 Grand Prix when Bruce McLaren achieved victory at the 1968 Belgian Grand Prix. However, an accident at Goodwood in 1970 ended the life of the owner and founder of the team, making McLaren's future situation very uncertain. Fortunately, Teddy Meyer, also a founding member of the team, was the one who took charge of this problem, not letting go of the team and securing massive financial support, in addition to creating a competitive structure that would allow them to win in 1974 their own first driver's title and the first constructor's title in McLaren's history. Later, in the 1980s, they sold part of the team to the company Project Ford, which was owned by Ron Dennis, a British businessman, and whose purpose would be to take McLaren to the greatest historical heights in Formula 1, leading the golden era of McLaren during his management. After all, how could we forget the era of Senna versus Prost? The 1988 car, the most successful in Formula 1 history until 2023, marked Mercedes' return to the category. The start of the partnership that made Häkkinen world champion in 1998 and 1999. Or the discovery of great legends, as was the case with Lewis Hamilton, who became world champion with them in 2008. McLaren was a team that, in the words of Fernando Alonso himself, guaranteed you would always have at least one winning car. But the end of 2012 brought many changes for this team. The loss of their superstar Lewis Hamilton and valuable staff like technical director Pettillo to another team in 2013. And it's right at this point where the first chapter of our story begins, the decline of McLaren. 2013 marked the start of the team's decline after years of having a car capable of winning. Because between internal tensions, a change in car concept that didn't work, and questionable decisions within the team, for the first time since 1980, McLaren not only failed to achieve a single victory in a Formula season, but also couldn't even get on the podium with either of their two drivers, who at that time were the Mexican Checo Perez and the British Jenson Button. This ended up costing the team, as they had to go through a restructuring, and those were difficult years full of constant changes. One example of this is that Mercedes, who had been their partner for a long time, now only saw them as a customer team since they had their own structure. In the 2014 season, it was slightly better than the previous one, since the McLaren in the first part of that 2014. The car seemed highly competitive, allowing them to secure a double podium in the first Grand Prix of the season. But in the end, the car was still not very competitive, far from its rivals, and definitely victory seemed like something very distant at this point. Seeing this situation, and that with Mercedes, it seemed like they weren't going to get anywhere. Ron Dennis returned as McLaren's chief executive officer in 2014. He saw reviving an old former glory of the team as the only way to quickly bring back success. and the greatest historic partnership ever seen in the category's history, bringing Honda back as their exclusive engine supplier to be the team's partner. And with that, bringing McLaren back to the historic level where they had always belonged. Ron Dennis was ambitious and wanted to build a super team to challenge Mercedes and come back in a big way. After a challenging period, they successfully brought back the longtime engine supplier and secured a partner willing to invest millions in the team. They also hired talented staff for their technical and management teams. For example, Eric Boullier, the team principal, who was part of the successful return of Lotus from 2011 to 2014. They also brought in Peter Promodro, who was Adrian Newey's right-hand man during Red Bull's golden era, from 2010 to 2013 being a very important signing of that time. Fernando Alonso was brought in to join Jenson Button, forming a driver pair with the experience of two world champions. McLaren was well positioned for success given their recent investments. A historic engine supplier with whom they had dominated Formula One in the past. Two world champion drivers and a pretty solid technical department. They had all the tools to win. But it's at this point in particular where McLaren starts, and I repeat, only starts, to hit rock bottom as a team in Formula One. They say that sequels never work, and at least the one between McLaren and Honda didn't. The Japanese developed an engine that was less powerful and less reliable than their rivals. And from 2015 to 2017, having Honda engines was a complete burden. That made the car not fast and forced it to retire from a huge number of races due to the constant reliability failures it had, which caused McLaren to go from being a midfield car to being a backmarker, which eventually led to Jenson Button's retirement as a driver and later made Fernando Alonso also decide to temporarily retire from Formula One. And all these years, the excuse was very clear: we're not fast because of Honda. This caused them to end their contract in 2017. Thinking this was their sole issue and that with a new engine supplier, McLaren was prepared to be a winning car once more. Since they said they had a very good car, a pretty powerful chassis, but their engine was the weak point. And this is the real point where this team hit rock bottom, when they stopped being powered by Honda. Since 2018 was a disastrous year where the car was still slow, they only managed to score 62 points throughout the whole year. And for many, the French Grand Prix that year is remembered as the most painful moment for McLaren fans, when their cars qualified in the last positions because of the tremendous lack of competitiveness that this car had. So 2018 exposed all the serious shortcomings that this team had, and that their lack of competitiveness was not exclusively Honda's fault, but there was also a clear lack of leadership, a deficient technical department, outdated facilities, and correlation problems. In short, McLaren was no longer a winning team. Something hard to accept for the second most successful team in the history of the Grand Circus. So you could say that at this point they hit rock bottom. And it's at this point in particular as well where the time comes for this team to rise from the very darkness. Ron Dennis's leadership was clearly a cause of the team's failure. Since 2007, the Bahrain Sovereign Fund had bought shares of the team, preventing Ron Dennis from buying back his share. To become the majority partner, he was fired from his position and forced to sell his McLaren share. Ron Dennis had been one of the most important geniuses that McLaren had for its historical legacy. So filling the shoes of someone like him was not going to be an easy thing. And to replace him, the McLaren board decided to bring in the man who, for many, is the Midas King of motorsport. This guy, who looks like Piojo Herrera, is named Zachary Calden Brown, better known as Zach Brown. He's a businessman and former racing driver who would take the position of Chief Executive Officer at McLaren, starting from the year 2018. At this point, Zach was known as the owner of United Autosport, a team established in 2009, known for winning historic competitions like the 24 Hours of Le Mans, being a multiple European Le Mans Series champion and 2020 World Endurance Championship winner in the Le Mans Prototype 2 category. And a long resume that backed up his experience in motorsport, so the guy was not an unknown. But now he was facing a completely different challenge and the biggest one of his career as a motorsport business manager. His task would be the not-so-easy job of bringing McLaren back to the highest historical step of world motorsport, practically from the bottom. From the start, Saki focused on detecting all of McLaren team's shortcomings. First, he knew he had to put the right people in the right positions to seek a stability that would allow the team to grow gradually. since it made no sense to make constant restructurings that would only make McLaren's process of returning to the top take longer, and that's something Ferrari hasn't understood all these years. Since 2018, when he took the position, he reaffirmed some positions in the technical department, made adjustments, and brought highly qualified personnel to the team, like Andreas Seidel at the time, who served as the operations director of Porsche during the team's golden era in the World Endurance Championship. He would now be the British team's principal. Also, the hiring of James Key as technical director, a rising Formula One engineer at the time. He also noted their facilities, particularly the factory, wind tunnel, and simulator, were severely lagging behind. So he decided to develop new facilities, technologically more advanced, modern, and on par with their top rivals. And when it came to drivers, South Ground decided to go for a combination with the McLaren Talent Academy. McLaren promoted their protege Lando Norris, while bringing in experienced drivers like Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo. And these changes quickly proved to be the right move by Piojo Herrera. Since 2019, the competitiveness of this team increased dramatically. They ended 2019 as the fourth team, securing their first podium at the Brazilian Grand Prix almost 6 years after their last one in Australia, 2014. But things wouldn't stop there, since 2020 and 2021 were years when McLaren's performance kept getting stronger. Would the podium streak continue? The results in the constructors' standings would continue to be quite positive, since in 2020 they finished in third place among the constructors. In 2021 they placed fourth. And that year, particularly at the Italian Grand Prix, McLaren once again knew what it felt like to be back. A winning team by achieving victory at the Italian Grand Prix with a 1-2 finish led by Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris. Zak Brown's management was progressing well, and things were gradually moving towards McLaren's desired destination. But even so, this path would not be without problems, since from 2021 to 2023. They also had to suffer the loss of important personnel such as Andreas Seidel, who left to lead the Audi project, failing in the attempt. They also suffered the loss of James Key as technical director, whom they fired. McLaren also hired and quickly dismissed personnel like David Sanchez, who only lasted a few days with the team. Daniel Ricciardo replaced Carlos Sainz, who had moved to Ferrari. He was a failed signing for McLaren, unable to show the competitive level from his best Formula One years. Moreover, 2022 was meant to mark a fresh start for McLaren. This, with the rule changes and the ground effect cars. It started in the worst possible way with a McLaren that had a serious brake problem that held them back during the first races. From that 2022 where I think many remember the pathetic result of the Bahrain Grand Prix, where they were a bottom-tier team. They were the worst team in that Grand Prix, precisely because of all the problems this structure was developing. But in the face of adversity, McLaren didn't give up and didn't let this bad streak consume them. They started making several quite interesting moves that began to strengthen the team and helped with its continued growth. First, they gave the position of team principal to the talented André Estella, since Zak Brown trusted that he was the right man for the job. Thus, he left his position as head of race operations and became one of the most important figures McLaren has today. They also took from Alpine a diamond in the rough as a driver coming from their driver academy, as was the case with Oscar Piastri, promising him a seat, which was exactly what Alpine didn't give him and which opened the window that allowed McLaren to sign him, so he could start competing from 2023. They also restructured the technical department, reinforcing it with skilled staff from other teams. And one of them, and probably the most important signing for this structure, was that of engineer Rob Marshall, who came from the engineering department at Red Bull, to take the position of technical director. A master in his field, renowned for his genius in exploiting regulatory gray areas like no other. With all these positive changes for the team, there was only one thing left to come. And it was one of the most important things to start being a winning team again in Formula One. And it was those new facilities, the factory, the wind tunnel, and the simulator, which was the only thing McLaren needed to be ready to fight. And these facilities arrived in 2023, a year that started with little competitiveness from the British team. But once this last piece of the puzzle was ready, and with an outstanding upgrade package starting from the Austrian Grand Prix, McLaren was back. With an upgrade package, the car made a sudden leap in performance, and it went from being a midfield team to already challenging Ferrari and Mercedes to be the best of the rest behind Red Bull. And the work wouldn't end there, because their technical department, showing their great skill, would shine again in 2024, where after the Miami upgrade package, McLaren not only had a fast car but also one capable of winning. And although they failed to win the driver's title with 6 victories in the season and 15 more podiums, all these changes culminated in winning the 9th Constructors' crown. At the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix that season, where McLaren had shown that their technical department was truly outstanding. Every upgrade they put on the car worked, something that was very difficult to achieve with the complex ground effect cars. Other teams like Ferrari, Aston Martin and Red Bull McLaren had already suffered from introducing upgrades that reduced performance instead of improving it. In contrast, every part they put on that single-seater improved its performance, strengthening their dominance and serving only as the foundation for what we would see in 2025. What everyone knows is happening is that this year, they not only have a winning car, they have a dominant car, where they have won 9 out of the 12 races this season without no other car even being able to keep up with them consistently throughout the entire season. This year's car has an extreme tire management ability, worthy of a technical department that studied a problem from 2022 and turned it into one of its greatest strengths, which so far no other team can match, and obviously with all the advantage they have, they will be Constructors' champions and you can be absolutely sure of that. The real question that remains for us this 2025 season is whether the Drivers' Champion will be Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris. Because no other driver can consistently achieve the results that the McLaren team has. And where their 2 drivers have pulled away in points from their main pursuer, the Dutchman and 4-time world champion Max Verstappen. In conclusion, the resurgence of McLaren is due to a large extent to one thing: leadership. Zak Brown knew exactly what changes were needed and the personnel required. And he knew how to put the right people in the right positions to give the team the historic resurgence it so deserved. Despite McLaren's numerous setbacks from 2011 to 2010, the brand managed to avoid fading into obscurity, unlike other teams that went from triumph to defeat and never recovered. But it was precisely McLaren's leadership ability, stability, and the right personnel that allowed McLaren to rise from the ashes and return to its historic place as one of the greatest on the grid. It was a restructuring that took the people from Woking 6 years to make work, but along the way, they found not only leadership, but also stability, talent, highly skilled personnel, and a completely crazy technical department. They have built a dominant car, and it's quite frightening to consider what they might achieve in the coming years. Because if they have reached this level for this season for 2026, with the rule changes, with the big advantage they've had in 2025, which has allowed them to focus much of their time and resources on the cars for the coming seasons, with the technical department they have and probably what is rumored to be the best engine on the grid, don't be surprised if 2025 is just the beginning of a new and dominant McLaren era,